This is one of those weeks where checking your bank account a little earlier than usual might just come with a welcome surprise. If you receive state pension or any DWP benefits, there's an important change you need to know about, and it's happening this very week. Both the Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, and Revenue and Customs, HMRC, have confirmed early payment dates due to the upcoming bank holiday. And if you've been wondering whether that affects your pension, universal credit, tax credits, or even your personal independence payment, the answer is yes, but not everyone will be affected the same way. That's why this update is critical. When a bank holiday falls on a Monday, like it does this week, any scheduled payments for that day are typically issued earlier, often on the preceding Friday. But depending on your specific benefit and how it's processed, the date can shift, and in rare cases, so can the amount if there's a processing delay or system error. HMRC has also issued a parallel notice for those receiving tax credits, especially for working-age claimants who rely on that payment to tide them over during the last stretch of the month. And this isn't just about one-off payments. This change has a knock-on effect for how you budget, especially if your direct debit bills are aligned with your usual benefit schedule. Missing this update could mean an unexpected shortfall or even bounced payments if you're not careful. That's why staying informed today could save you from unnecessary stress in the days ahead. So before the bank holiday throws your routine off course, let's walk through the official changes, who they apply to, and how to check your exact payment date. Whether you're retired, semi-retired, or still relying on top-up support, this update affects millions across the UK. Let's make sure you're not left guessing. Now, as we were saying, knowing when your payment is going to land in your account is more than just a calendar concern, it's a lifeline for many people. Especially if you rely on your pension or a combination of benefits to keep the lights on, pay for prescriptions, or make sure there's enough for the weekly shop. An unexpected change, even if it's an early payment, can throw your budgeting completely off. And with the cost of everything still pushing higher, from gas bills to a simple loaf of bread, it's never been more important to stay on top of when and how much you're getting paid. So, what exactly is changing this week? Let's walk through it together. This week, we've got a bank holiday falling on Monday, and that has triggered a domino effect through the DWP and HMRC systems. For most people scheduled to be paid on Monday, your money will actually arrive on the Friday before. So if your normal payment date is Monday the 21st, your money should reach you on Friday the 18th. That's been confirmed directly by DWP and HMRC in their most recent update. But remember, while that might sound like good news, and in many ways, it is, it also means you've got a longer stretch until your next payment comes through. What would normally be a 7-day gap might now be closer to 10 or 11, depending on how the dates fall next time around. That's why it's important not just to know when you'll be paid, but also to plan ahead. Let's be honest, many of us have had to adjust our habits already with the way prices have shifted lately. Whether it's cutting back on little luxuries, switching to off-brand groceries, or turning the heating off a bit earlier in the day, we're all making sacrifices. And when your income is fixed, every day matters. So having your money a few days early might seem convenient at first, but it also means those pounds need to stretch that little bit further, for a little bit longer. Now, not everyone gets paid on the same day, and that's another detail that causes a fair bit of confusion. Your state pension, for example, is usually paid every 4 weeks, and the exact day depends on the last 2 digits of your national insurance number. If yours ends in 00 to 19, you're likely to be paid on a Monday. But if your number ends in 20 to 39, your payment comes on a Tuesday, and so on through the week. That means only some people are actually affected by the Monday bank holiday, those who would have been paid on that day. But it's not just pensions we're talking about here. Universal credit is another benefit that will be paid early this week if your date falls on the bank holiday. Same goes for personal independence payment, PIP, employment and support allowance, ESA, job seekers allowance, JSA, and income support. Even child benefit and working tax credits may arrive ahead of schedule if you're usually paid on a Monday. But again, and it's worth repeating, this isn't a bonus. It's not extra money. It's just your usual payment, brought forward. Which means you'll need to wait a little longer for the next one to appear. One thing that trips people up quite often is forgetting to double-check whether their bank actually processes incoming payments on the weekend. Most major UK banks do, so if your payment is issued on a Friday, it'll likely show up that same day. But if there's ever a delay, or if you're with a smaller institution, it might not hit your account until Saturday morning, or possibly even after the weekend. And that's when panic sets in, especially for those who weren't expecting the change and suddenly find themselves short of funds. That's why it's always worth setting a reminder the week before a bank holiday, just to check your payment dates and make sure everything is lining up. Now let's talk about another wrinkle in the system that many people overlook: HMRC payments. Tax credits, which are still being paid out to some individuals who haven't been moved over to universal credit yet, follow a slightly different schedule. If your tax credit payment date falls on a bank holiday Monday, it too will be brought forward. But unlike DWP, which typically issues payments on Friday before a bank holiday Monday, HMRC has occasionally processed payments as early as the Thursday prior. That can lead to confusion, especially when your partner or family member is on a different benefit and gets their money on a completely different day. And when bills are shared, as they often are in households where people cohabitate, it's critical that everyone knows what's coming in and when. And if you've recently been migrated from legacy benefits to universal credit, this might be your first time experiencing how universal credit handles bank holidays. Unlike legacy systems, which had a bit more leeway, universal credit sticks to a very strict monthly payment cycle. Your payment date is usually fixed based on the date of your first payment, and it will only change if it falls on a weekend or bank holiday. In that case, it too will be moved earlier, which is great in theory, but again, it stretches out the days between this payment and the next. We've also heard from some viewers who've had their payments arrive later than expected during bank holiday weeks. And while that's not the norm, it does happen. Usually, this is down to banking systems being overwhelmed or technical issues behind the scenes. But if you ever find that your payment hasn't arrived when it should, there are a few steps you can take. First, check your bank account throughout the day, not just in the morning. Some payments land later in the day, particularly if they've been processed manually or delayed in some way. If it's still not there by the end of the day, it's time to contact your bank first, because 9 times out of 10, the issue lies there, not with DWP or HMRC. But if your bank confirms that no payment is pending, then it's time to call the helpline for the benefit in question. Be prepared with your national insurance number, your payment history, and the exact amount you're expecting. The good news is that in most cases, missing payments are resolved within 24 hours, especially if you call early enough in the day. But again, it's one more bit of stress that nobody needs, especially when a little planning could avoid the hassle altogether. Now, let's turn our attention to why these payment changes matter even more this year than in years past. Inflation may not be rising as rapidly as it did during the pandemic years, but prices haven't really come down, have they? Council tax bills are up in most boroughs, energy bills remain unpredictable, and food costs continue to climb, particularly for fresh produce, dairy, and basic cupboard items. And while the state pension did go up in April thanks to the triple lock, many feel it's still not enough to keep pace with the true cost of living. So, when payments are shifted even slightly, it can have a ripple effect across your entire budget. For example, if you've set up direct debits for your utility bills right after your pension lands, an early payment can mean those debits go out sooner than you'd expected. And if you're someone who relies on manually transferring funds or topping up prepayment meters, that early payment might be used more quickly than intended, leaving you in a tight spot before the next cycle. It's also worth mentioning that the government has issued updated guidance this year to ensure that communication around early payments is clearer. But not everyone gets those notices in time. Some people only find out when their payment hits their account unexpectedly, and while that's a better surprise than a missing payment, it can still lead to confusion. That's why we're committed to keeping you informed here, so you're never caught off guard. One area where people have had a lot of questions is how early payments affect benefit reviews or assessments. Rest assured, getting your money early due to a bank holiday won't affect your eligibility or count as a change in circumstances. It's simply an administrative adjustment. However, if you've recently submitted a form for reassessment, say, for PIP or attendance allowance, it's a good idea to keep an eye on your letters and notifications during bank holiday periods. Sometimes, those too can be delayed or sent early, depending on Royal Mail's holiday delivery schedule. We also know that many of you help support others, maybe it's a spouse, a neighbor, or an adult child with a disability. And when their benefits are affected by early payment shifts, it can become your concern too. That's why we always recommend sitting down with a cuppa and checking your calendars together. One 10-minute conversation can prevent a week of headaches later. So, where does this all leave us? Well, this week's changes are part of a predictable pattern that repeats every bank holiday. But what's unpredictable is how prepared each individual household is to manage that shift. That's why we always encourage you to treat these updates seriously, even if they seem small. Knowing your payment is coming early allows you to prepare not just for this week, but for the gap until your next payment. It gives you the chance to adjust your spending, hold off on non-essentials, and maybe even set a little bit aside if you can. And finally, while the payment dates themselves might be shifting this week, one thing hasn't changed: your right to stay informed, supported, and in control of your finances. Whether it's understanding how the DWP calendar works, knowing your entitlements, or simply making sure you're not the last to know, staying plugged into updates like this one puts the power back in your hands. We'll continue bringing you the latest from DWP, HMRC, and beyond, from payment updates to new cost of living support, policy changes, and pension developments. Because staying informed is the first step to staying financially steady, and that's something we all deserve, no matter our age or circumstance.